Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
Local news, politics, business, sports, arts, music. Mike and Marty on the beat. Mike and Marty. Mike and Marty.
Good morning, Bellows Falls and Keene, and welcome to The Feed. It's Mike and Marty. We're here today with Leslie Goldman and Michelle Bos-Lun. We're going to be talking about the Windham 3 upcoming election and what's happening at the state and what issues are concerning people and concerning the voters of Vermont. But first, Marty, with local events.
So at the Bellows Falls Opera House this week, running actually through the 17th, is Beetlejuice. Don't say it a third time. Otherwise he'll be here. The classic movie is truly one of the great classics. It's The Blind Side. It's like the perfect movie because we're coming into football season. It's a feel-good movie that is sponsored by Coda and Coda. I want to give a plug. We had, a couple weeks ago, we had Keith Marks here from Next Stage, and he was talking about the possibility of a bandwagon series happening in Bellows Falls, one of the concerts, and he didn't have a lot of details on it yet, but I can give you the details. It's happening Sunday, September 15th, 5 p.m. at the Robertson Paper. They're calling it the Robertson Paper Field. So where Robertson Paper used to be, there's now a big field, and that's where it's going to be. It's a South American band called La Sonora, and I know I'm going to mess up the last name, Mazurn, and it's basically it's Latin music but with more like synthesizer and electric guitar and percussion, so it's a little different. So they're coming. Tickets are $20 in advance, $25 at the door. As always, there will be Bar Hill Gin on site for libations, and then there's usually a food truck. And we really want to encourage people to get out and attend, because this is kind of like a hallmark of will we get more bandwagon series coming here in the fall. It's like a test drive. They reward venues that actually have people at them, and it's nice for the performers too, because I believe this might be the first time they've come to this area. So we have Betsy Thurston coming on next week to talk a little bit more about it. She'll go into more detail, but I'm just going to give a plug so people can mark it on their calendar.
Okay. I don't know if I can put you on the spot, but you have a couple of local events happening in Westminster, right?
We do. I mean, they're not personally my events, but as a resident of Westminster, I am planning on attending, and I do know about them. So this coming Saturday, which is the 7th, I believe, is the West Fair, and that's actually a fundraiser for the church, but the church, as most people know, also serves as a pretty central hub and community center for all of Westminster West. So there's a large parade, there's a giant chicken dinner, and they have vegetarian options. There's a large sale that includes books and all kinds of other things.
Is it going to be behind the Institute, or do you know?
No, so the West Fair is in the West, like it's in downtown West.
Okay.
It's centered at the church.
Right in the...
And then the parade goes from the old West School to the church. So that's on the 7th. And then a week from the 7th, on the 14th, there's a new festival, a relatively new festival. I believe this is the first time, and it's called the Westminster Festival. And that's going to be in the village. And that is going to be happening in the field by the Institute.
Okay.
And there are going to be a whole variety of things, including music and child-friendly activities and food. And that'll be another opportunity for people from Westminster and the surrounding areas to just come and engage and celebrate in and with Westminster.
That's great. It must be Westminster Week, though, because I know on the 12th they're going to do. There's a group getting together that's going to do a Westminster bus tour with people who are significant members of the Westminster community. Are going to go to different locations and talk about the historical perspective of each of those locations.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I hadn't heard about that one.
Well, in fact, TV is going to be filming it.
Nice.
And we're going to make like a little documentary.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
See, there were more local events?
I know. Like I said,
there's so much to do around here. It's hard to keep up.
It is sometimes. Sometimes it's hard to find like where people are promoting, and so if it's not real obvious, like if it's not in the event section, just to shout out to people that are creating events, pop them in the event section on so they pop up on Facebook, because that's the first place I look, just for time's sake, to not have to scroll through a lot of Facebook to find it. But anywho, we digress.
Yes, sorry. We have, our guests today are representatives from Westminster 3, right?
Windham
3. I got Westminster
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
sorry.
no, it's fine.
Windham 3,
Yeah.
currently representing us at the state government, up for re-election this year. So we want to reintroduce you guys and give you, I guess, a chance to talk about what you want people to know about. So, you want to go first, Leslie? Or?
Sure. For those that don't know me, my name is Leslie Goldman. I am one of 2 Democratic representatives, Michelle and I, for Windham 3. I've served for 4 years, and I'm running for re-election for a 3rd term. So why do I want to serve another 2 years? Serving the needs of people and solving problems have been my career focus as a nurse practitioner, a school board member, a select board member, and now a legislator. I like taking on problems and writing good policies to address them. Right now, the biggest problems in the state, and for Windham 3, are housing shortages and affordability. A less talked about problem is the sustainability of our healthcare system, and a report about that is expected very shortly. The Democratic majority in the House and Senate have started to tackle these problems, and I want to continue the work that's been started. Housing, affordability, and healthcare, as well as education, are all intertwined. And unfortunately, there are no simple solutions. Because of our shrinking population and our aging population, which are 2 really incredibly big problems for Vermont right now, we need short-term solutions and we need long-term thinking. I can go into more detail about this complexity, but the reason I'm running for a 3rd term is to continue the work that I feel is vitally important. It's what we Democrats do. We invest in people and we invest in the future.
Great, thank you. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I know you don't have a prepared statement, but go ahead.
That's fine.
She's really very good at this.
I'm a teacher. I'm happy to speak without notes. So I am a teacher. I've most of my career I've worked with adolescents. I have done some work in early childhood and with college and gap year age students as well. I've been a classroom teacher, I've been a case manager, I've worked in youth program development with programs like the Governor's Institute and study abroad programs. So in a whole variety of different ways, I've worked with youth as both a teacher and sometimes in more of like a social service kind of capacity. And through doing those roles, and also some of the positions that I had, got me working very closely with individuals who were really struggling. So at times I've been a case manager with youth who had inadequate housing. I've worked with individuals who had serious mental health issues and substance use disorder issues. And so I have a pretty large collection of understanding from these different situations I've encountered about the things that are not working in Vermont. And I absolutely agree with Leslie's list. That impacts housing, it impacts education, it impacts the affordability of healthcare, and all of those things come together and are a really big problem. And Leslie and I were elected at the same time 4 years ago during the pandemic, which was a hard time to come into the office. It's been a big learning curve for us. It took a long time to learn to be a legislator on Zoom for the first year.
Right.
And now we've been 3 years in person. And now I feel like I understand the system, I understand where to go to get answers, I understand how to make change. And so I really feel like I owe it to myself and to our constituents to serve for another term so that I can be more effective and continue to work on these very complex issues.
That's actually my question that's kind of the thing is like a 2-year term enough to really learn what you need to learn? I mean, I'm assuming it's kind of like anything when you first take over, it's all new. You got to know the ins and outs. And then by the time you get up to speed, like you just said, it's time to be reelected again. So I think that's a consideration, like for voters to think about, that sometimes, I'm not saying one way or the other, but turnover can mean that there's a learning curve again, and I think it speaks to effectiveness, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Leslie, if you have a thought, but...
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think 2 years is way too short. When I served on the school board, it was 3 years. The first year, you learned stuff. The second year, you were effective and beginning to do, and the third year, then you're running again. I think 4 years would be ideal, as we have at the federal government, in some seats. But 3 years would be ideal. I think, if we were to make a change. To have the whole entire elected government turn over every 2 years means you never have long-term thinking.
Yeah,
and,
that's what-
and the effectiveness, I think, is really limited.
Because a lot of what you are talking about is really, I mean, the healthcare issue and Act 167 and all that, that's not going to unravel in even 5 years maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I also
it's like
think
one of those, it's like a yarn ball and
Yeah.
you got to pull
Yeah,
little
yeah.
threads of it.
Totally.
it's not a very good use of our time. Like right now, we're representatives, and our current term goes until January, but we're running for re-election, and so we're spending a lot of time doing outreach events, and some of those are great. We do outreach events all year long, whether we're running for a campaign year or not, but there's certain things like writing postcards to our constituents and going and knocking on all the doors. Like, it takes a lot of time. We can't work on some other things because we're doing those things. And while on the one hand, it's good to get to connect with voters, it would be nice to be able to connect with voters a little less frequently in that kind of way, and more intensively focus on the issue areas that we really want to address.
And are you
Do you think
hearing-
that's effective, though, than continuing, like writing postcards? To me, that's not, as we're sitting here and everybody has Zoom and Facebook and Instagram, the idea of you sitting down writing a postcard seems to be very inefficient.
I think what we want to do is reach voters in a lot of different ways,
Yeah,
and particularly for people who are undecided, who don't know us, who just moved to the community. If they see a postcard and they're like, "Oh, this is Leslie. Oh, she used to be a nurse. Oh, this is Michelle.
This is what we're talking about.
She works as a teacher." It gives voters a little chance to know who we are. I mean, a fair number of voters, like 10% of voters, leave the state representative line blank.
Really?
And I would like people not to leave that line blank.
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
like them to look at the choices and make a choice, and that's one way that they can be informed.
You would think it would be almost the opposite, that they would know you and say, "Oh, I know Leslie," or "I know
And
Michelle,"
sometimes they
yeah,
do.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do.
I think Marty raises a really good point when you mentioned Act 167, because that's a healthcare process that's now coming through. Well, that started in 22. Here we are in 24. We're now getting the report from something that we started in 22. Now we'll get the report in 24, and the legislature in 25 and 26 will now implement what's been suggested, maybe. So we don't even know. So that's now 4 or 5 years that it's going to come through the legislature, and if there's all this turnover, there's no knowledge.
There's no continuity.
That's right. So I'm worried about it. I'm worried. Well, my interest in healthcare, that's my passion. And I'm very interested in the Act 167 report, which is looking at hospital sustainability. And that's coming out September 18th. I don't know if you heard that, but I just wanted to be sure you know that.
I knew it was coming out soon, only because I have a little more knowledge than the average bear about it, because I have to. But
Yeah.
but again, it's tied in. What they're finding, or what in the preliminary, is it's tied into everything else. It's tied into the aging population. That's a consideration. The people leaving, the working population. That it's kind of in that sweet spot of they're the ones that have the good insurance, and the insurance is what pays out better than like regular health insurance pays out better. So it's all complicated.
And when we had the consultant come, and I think you were at one of those meetings, the first problem he mentioned was housing. And that, he wasn't even talking about healthcare, he was talking about housing, because we can't get professionals, teachers, doctors, nurses, people we need in our community to find places to live here. So that's huge.
Now, I know can you speak to, maybe you weren't specifically on these committees, but I know they're one of the things that people hear sometimes about trying to do anything in Vermont is like Act 250. And there's been some reform to Act 250 to try to, was that driven by trying to loosen and make housing, like creating housing a little easier? Was that kind of the driving train?
I think that was a huge driver. Like, trying to make policies so that we could look at our rural communities, try and develop when possible in city centers, as opposed to, we don't want to have Vermont turn into a place full of strip malls all over our sweet small towns. But at the same time, we do need to find ways to let housing be developed, because we need more housing. And we have to find a balance. And so reforming Act 250 is going to lead towards that balance.
I think that, if I may, a lot of people found Act 250 difficult to navigate. There was a lot of dark spots there. So this was an opportunity to try, if I may, improve the Act 250 process, and I hope that will be true. But you never know until you do it, and that's always the case. Theory is one thing, but when you operationalize something, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe how this turned out. But Act 250, as Michelle was saying, if we have good small downtowns, that's good for the elderly, right? We want to have walking downtowns. It's good for kids. It's good to have kids to walk to schools and have town centers and not have sprawl. And then protect the gorgeousness of Vermont, as we've loved the last few days, right? It's been perfect. So all of this, it's complex, right? It all fits together, and the Act 250 reform is hoping to do that, to improve housing and improve community.
And my understanding is it also, it was, at least a little part of it that I know, the reform part, it was to help give more local control, like zoning board control versus, at the state level. Because zoning board knows the zoning, and they know, when they do a site visit, they know, the place. And so I think that's a step. I think that's a step to making it perhaps less complicated, because when it becomes local control, people are vested in it.
Yeah, and to have zoning that makes sense. So in some places it doesn't make sense. You can't put a second floor in a place, or you can't put an accessory dwelling unit. Trying to really maximize, our housing as it is, to turn a big, one of these old big buildings into apartments in a way that makes sense and is beautiful.
And it's still complicated.
Yeah, it is still
We did some
complicated,
reform.
yeah.
It's still complicated.
Not
It
perfect.
still needs work.
But it's a start,
Yeah,
right?
it's a start.
Yeah.
And that's how it is with almost every single thing we work on. Like, I don't know that we fixed anything, but we made progress in many, many areas.
Well, we both, if I may say, Michelle,
Yeah.
voted for it, and we also voted to override the veto.
Yeah.
So that's been a big sort of issue in the legislature, is the governor's vetoes. We voted to override 6 out of 8. And I would prefer not to govern that way. I wish that there was much more connection between the executive branch and the legislative branch, because we have to care about Vermonters, not be fighting each other. So I would love to see improvement there.
Right.
Yeah,
I think the governor would too.
I hope so.
I sort of along that line, one of the I think sticking points was the property tax and the amount of that it increased, and then and I don't want to come down on any one side of this, but maybe talk about the complexities of this, because it's not just property taxes, education, property tax, and housing. All
Everything.
It's maybe more than, I see it as at least a triangle, but even more than that.
Yeah, there are many, many angles to it. Should I start or you start?
I can go either way.
Okay. Just to start, our education tax is decided locally. So all the school boards, vote on their budget. So that is a local control issue. We did it in our town. Every town does it. Every school district does it. That money is all put into a giant pot and then goes up to the state. Once that number is known, then the tax can be determined based on the number of students that you have in your district. So that's called the yield. So the yield bill is something that we absolutely must pass. That was very controversial this year. But we did pass it, and that was a good thing. We know that there are problems in our educational system. We have too small schools. We have too small classrooms. This is statewide, we have about 80,000 students in Vermont. It's like a small city, right? Because the whole state
That's
is,
interesting.
it's very hard, I think, for us as a state to have to do all the state-like things with the amount of population that we have. So that's a real challenge. Once that yield is determined, then it goes back to the towns as the property tax, and then of course the municipal piece is added onto that. This year in particular, there were 4 things that affected the property tax locally. One was it was Act 122, which was pupil weighting, and that was, there are some students that require more resources than other students, and we live in a rural area which has poverty, so it costs more for us to educate those kinds of students than towns that don't have that. Well, with this new act, we get more money because of those students. The students are weighted more, we get more money. Health insurance, 16% increase in health insurance for teachers. Huge, right? That really affected budgets. Inflation was another issue that really affected budgets. And
Mental health costs
Mental-
for adolescents and youth in schools.
right, and what was happening with that, which is really important, is that was coming out of the education budget rather than the health budget. Is mental health a health issue or an education issue? I think it's a health issue. It should come out of the health budget, but currently it was coming out of education
Because
our
the salary of the it's tied into the
it
salary.
was
of the
tied
teachers.
into that
Or
school
it's a
districts
benefit.
could not get staff to do the mental health work through the local designated agencies, so they had to hire them themselves. Hiring themselves took it out of the education budget. Does that make any sense? I mean, really
Does.
complex,
Yeah.
right?
Everything is
complex.
so-
I'm not.
so-
I just want to add.
it.
I just want to add two quick things to
Yeah.
that as well. So one is that I actually had some voters come to the polls on primary day, very upset about their property taxes. And when I tried to explain what Leslie just explained, they couldn't hear it. They said, "You raised our taxes. You raised our taxes." But really, the voters raised the taxes when they approved the school board budget. What we ended up doing actually on the legislative level is we put in some reserve funds to drop the rate lower than it
Because
would
it
have
would have
been.
been higher.
Right.
But people said, "Oh, you should have cut the budget." We can't. We can't cut the local budget that's been approved by the voters. That's not how it works. There are different levels. There's a local control and there's a state control. And so sometimes there's anger that's directed at us when really our job is to just figure out how do we make this work with the number that we have the need for. And it's
Well,
very
and just
complicated.
to counter that,
Yeah.
coming back from the voters' side, is
Sure.
they're trying to, they may or may not be living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
And then they come back and there's an 18% increase in their taxes. And
Totally.
they're like,
That's
how
hard.
could this possibly? And I'm sure they don't get that when they said, "Oh, I want my kid to have a great education, and I voted for this
Yeah.
increase." That they don't
There's no
connect
connection.
it.
Right.
And that's what
Yeah.
I'm sort of glad we're talking about this,
Yeah.
because I think these are the discussions we need to have. Is, oh yeah, you can have this, but
It
I
costs.
mean nothing's free. It's,
It costs.
Right.
I think one thing that came out of this whole conversation is the Committee on the Future of Education. I don't have that right. There's a commission that's just been designated, and it's going to look at how we pay for our
That's what we
education.
need to do.
And some people think it should be all income and not property, or there's going to be a deep dive, and that's in work now. And then hopefully we can revise this. We have the most complicated education formula in the country.
I bet.
We do,
And it's not very
Not
fair.
surprised.
It's not
Yeah,
very
yeah,
fair.
it's
It makes
not.
it very difficult for homeowners, particularly homeowners on a limited income. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult for many voters. And the thing is, what also people don't realize is another factor that can come into play is if you're in a town that's had reappraisals, your taxes might go up even if your rate didn't go up. In Westminster, our tax rate didn't go up. But if your house value has increased, your taxes are going to go up. So my taxes went up. My tax rate didn't go up in Westminster because of the way the students played out. But people don't understand that. It's like your house is worth more. If you sell it, one day you're going to get more money for it. But you're also going to be taxed more for it. And that has nothing to do with us. That's just the economy. And
and COVID.
Yeah.
And, all the people moving in and buying things and, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I truly don't know how you guys do what you do anyway.
It's
I
very
can't
hard.
imagine. I can't imagine because so we're getting not super low on time, but a little bit.
Okay.
Can you kind of just talk about one win you had this year? 'Cause it sounds like there was a lot of we couldn't really we got this, but we got so much more to do. But if you look at one win, I sometimes do that here. If one thing goes really well, I'm taking that as the win today. what would be your win for your year this year?
I'm trying. It's hard for me to remember what was this year versus the year before.
Well,
Did we pass
whatever.
universal school meals
Yeah.
this year, Leslie, or was that 2 years ago?
It was last.
I guess in your term, you're
Yeah.
living
Okay,
your
so in the
term.
last biennium.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I'll just say that, as an educator and somebody who is concerned about kids and kids eating and having enough food and poverty, we passed this universal school meals bill, which is going to make it possible for kids all over Vermont to get the food they need in schools, both for breakfast and for lunch. And it's complicated, but it's also, I think, just really important. Many places in the world, that's how they do it. And I think on a very basic level, we need to provide food for kids. And I personally feel good about that.
Yeah, I'll just add, and then I'll add one. Future Vice President Walz, I should say, hopefully. He made a comment that kids with full bellies can learn better. And that's what we want to aim for with this. In addition, though, that families who have means, they don't have to rush around to make lunches in the mornings anymore. They can have really quality time before kids go off to school. So that's supporting families, and that's important. My win is something called the Unused Drug Repository, which was my only and my favorite bill. And what that is it's taking unused meds from nursing homes and hospitals, and rather than throwing them into the landfill or incinerating them so that we breed them, they are now being repurposed and given away to people for free.
Oh, that's
Oh,
awesome.
nice.
I
That's
love
great.
that bill. It
That's
is
great.
just very sweet. So it just passed through the rules system and is going to be start distributing in September. I'm
Perfect.
very
That's a great
excited
one.
by that.
So
Well,
I
we're just about out of time. I would just add, your conversation of the complexity of these issues, to me, is a sort of a statement saying maybe you should be there longer, because it takes so long to get up to speed with these amazingly complex issues.
I think that's true, and also there are so many different issues. Like, you can't be an expert on every
Yeah,
issue, you
yeah.
can't. But you have to vote on every issue.
Yeah.
So you have to learn enough to make a responsible decision. And it takes a long time to get there. And so,
I'm going to comment on that, Michelle, because of the yield bill. In one day, I listened to 3 different presentations to try to understand this. And by the end of the third one, I began to understand it. Really, it took that much.
That's a lot
It
of
really
work.
takes
It's
so
really
much
complicated.
of brain. And
Complicated.
sometimes I feel like my brain's going to explode. But it's meaningful. Yeah, it's honorable, and it's a great honor to represent Windham 3 in this setting.
So super
Right.
quick, best way to contact you if people want to reach out to you?
I mean, email or telephone is fine. Do you want me to actually give the number?
Yep.
Okay.
No,
so-
just give me just email.
Or Michelle,
It's up.
MICHELLEFORVT at gmail.com. You also can do my website, which is michelleforvt.com. And on my website, there will be email and phone number contacts.
Leslie?
Yeah, same for me. It's on the screen, which is my website. It has my number and email. So yeah, I respond to everybody. There's a legislative email as well, which also works.
Great. Okay, well,
Great.
thank you so much. I know this
Yes.
is probably just the tip of the iceberg, but that's
Hope
all
you
we
can
have
come
time
back.
for.
Yeah, I'd be
All
glad
right.
to.
We'll see you next week for the feed.
Bye.
Politics, business, sports, arts, music.